The moment Tayung stepped back into the studio, a subtle tension settled over the room. It wasn't the kind of tension that erupted into arguments or loud confrontations, but rather a quiet, almost imperceptible weight that seemed to linger in the air. Everyone noticed, even if they pretended not to. Yet, none more so than Jungkook. At first glance, he moved as if nothing had changed. His limbs flowed through the choreography with the precision and grace that fans had come to expect. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, there was a fragility in every gesture. A hesitation in the way he lifted his arm, a pause just before a spin, a subtle tightness in the set of his jaw. There was a story behind those movements, one that no one but he could tell. During the initial warm-up, Jungkook's eyes flickered toward Taeyung constantly. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't even jealousy. It was something harder to define, a quiet questioning, a search for understanding, or maybe a silent plea for reassurance. He would glance at the floor, shake his head slightly, and then throw himself back into the routine. The rhythm continued, the music pounding, the studio lights reflecting off the mirrors, but inside him, a storm was quietly brewing. Fans watching the live broadcast later would comment endlessly about his performance. Some praised his focus, marveling at how he seemed to elevate every move to a higher level. Others noticed the melancholy lurking beneath each step, the subtle expressions that betrayed emotions far deeper than mere exhaustion from practice. "Is he okay?" they asked. "Why does it feel like every smile hides something?" No one in the studio dared to ask him directly. Jungkook's outward calm was convincing enough to dissuade questions. But those closest to him, staff, choreographers, even his bandmates, noticed. They noticed the slight droop in his shoulders, the way he would occasionally stare at Taeyung for just a fraction too long before quickly diverting his gaze. They noticed how he sometimes lingered on movements that once brought him joy, performing them mechanically as if searching for a feeling that had slipped away. It wasn't just the choreography. During breaks, Jungkook sat quietly, headphones in, eyes staring into the distance. He didn't scroll through his phone. He didn't talk to anyone. He simply existed in that fragile space between exhaustion and emotion, a space no one else could reach. Every so often, Taeyung would glance at him, a mixture of concern and uncertainty crossing his face. And each time, Jungkook would offer a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture meant to reassure, but it felt more like a shield than a message of comfort. Observers later speculated endlessly. Was this sadness born from personal struggles? From professional pressure? Or was it the complex, unspoken dynamics between the two members, now laid bare in the most subtle of ways? One thing was certain. Jungkook's movements, his expressions, even his pauses, carried a depth of emotion that was impossible to ignore. As the practice continued, patterns emerged. Jungkook would occasionally exaggerate certain moves, almost as if he were trying to communicate without words. A lift of the hand, a tilt of the head, a glance toward the mirrors. Each subtle cue seemed laden with meaning. Some interpreted it as artistry. Others sensed the sorrow woven into the artistry. And yet, no matter how precise his execution, no one could ignore the quiet heaviness in his presence. The music shifted to a slower track, a song they had rehearsed countless times. Normally, Jungkook would immerse himself completely, letting the melody guide him, letting the rhythm dictate the flow of his body. Today, however, each step seemed heavier, as though the weight of unseen emotions pressed down on him. His eyes betrayed it, those deep brown eyes flicking briefly toward Taeyung before refocusing on the floor. It was a dance of restraint and longing, a performance layered with meanings only he could truly feel. Choreographers whispered quietly among themselves. They had worked with Jungkook long enough to notice the difference immediately. There was something fragile about the way he held himself, a subtle hesitation before every high-energy move, a tiny falter in spins that once appeared effortless. Some speculated it was fatigue, but anyone who truly knew him could tell this was something different, something heavier, something that had settled deep in his chest the moment Taeyung returned. Taeyung, for his part, seemed aware of the undercurrent. He didn't confront it, didn't ask direct questions. He simply existed in the same space, moving through the choreography with his usual charisma, his occasional glances toward Jungkook carrying layers of concern and curiosity. Every time their eyes met, there was a fleeting flash of connection, a recognition of unspoken truths. And yet, Jungkook's responses remained measured, almost guarded. A delicate balance between openness and self-protection. In one corner of the studio, a staff member quietly adjusted the lighting, but their attention kept drifting back to Jungkook. There was a certain poetry in his struggle, a magnetism that went beyond skill or technique. Even as he performed, as sweat glistened on his brow and muscles flexed under strain, his body spoke of something deeper, an unvoiced sorrow, a quiet turbulence hidden beneath the practiced exterior. Every gesture, every glance, seemed to carry a story of longing, of uncertainty, of emotional weight. As the day progressed, Jungkook's intensity increased. His movements became sharper, more precise, almost as if he were channeling his inner conflict into the choreography itself. The music swelled, his body responding instinctively, yet there was a subtle discrepancy between the power of his performance and the emotional fragility it conveyed. Observers could feel it, a silent dialogue between skill and sentiment, technique and vulnerability. Breaks were no relief. Jungkook remained largely silent, headphones in, staring off into space. Occasionally, he would scribble something in a notebook, perhaps notes about the choreography, perhaps thoughts he couldn't voice aloud. When Tayung approached him, there was a brief moment of hesitation, a micro-expression of vulnerability that quickly vanished behind a mask of composure. They exchanged no words, only glances heavy with emotion and unsaid understanding. Fans, who would later see behind-the-scenes footage and live-stream clips, were quick to notice. Social media erupted with speculation. Why does Jungkook look so sad? Is this about Taeyung's return? Every move he makes seems to carry pain. The reactions were endless, a testament to the emotional resonance Jungkook projected without uttering a single word. His subtle gestures, tiny pauses, and fleeting expressions became the subject of passionate discussion, as if each movement contained a secret code meant for those willing to look deeper. Even during the most physically demanding sequences, the sadness lingered. When he executed complex spins or intricate footwork, there was a softness in his eyes, a restraint in his gestures that contradicted the explosive energy of his body. It was as though he were performing two roles simultaneously, the polished idol the world expected, and the private individual wrestling with a profound, unspoken emotion. Taeyung's presence seemed both comforting and destabilizing. On one hand, it was reassuring to have him back, to see the familiar spark of his energy lighting up the studio. On the other, it intensified Jungkook's inner conflict. The interactions between them, fleeting glances, subtle shifts in body language, the unspoken tension, were like an invisible thread tugging at Jungkook's focus, pulling him into a realm of introspection even amid a high-intensity rehearsal. By evening, the atmosphere in the studio had transformed. What started as casual practice had become a performance charged with emotional gravity. Jungkook's movements were immaculate, yet the sorrow behind them was undeniable. Staff members exchanged worried glances, choreographers muttered questions under their breath, and even Taeyung's usually bright demeanor carried a hint of concern. The music faded, the lights dimmed, and Jungkook stood in the center of the room, breathing heavily, eyes glistening. Not with exhaustion, but with the quiet weight of emotions that had accompanied him all day. And then, without warning, he lowered his gaze and let a single hand rest against the mirror. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. In that moment, the world saw not the idol perfected by years of training and fame, but the human beneath, the one struggling to reconcile emotion and performance, connection and distance, joy and sadness. Tayung, standing a few feet away, did not approach immediately. He waited, sensing the depth of Jungkook's vulnerability, knowing that some moments required patience rather than words. This was the reality behind the headlines, behind fan speculation, behind every viral clip. It was a portrait of a man caught between the brilliance of his public persona and the complexity of private emotion, of a relationship complicated by time, distance, and unspoken truths. The studio, filled with the echoes of music, mirrors reflecting tireless practice, and the silent energy of performers, had become a stage for more than choreography. It had become a canvas for the subtleties of human emotion, painted with the delicate brushstrokes of gestures, glances, and moments suspended in time. As the evening deepened, the studio lights cast long shadows across the polished floor, reflecting Jungkook's every subtle movement. The music had shifted once again, slower now, almost melancholic, and his body responded with a tenderness that contrasted starkly with the precision of the choreography. Every step, every sway, every lift seemed to carry a weight invisible to those who only saw the surface. Fans watching from afar would later comment on how it seemed as though he was dancing through memories, through moments of longing, through a silent dialogue with the past that no one else could hear. Jungkook's eyes lingered on Tayung more than usual, not with accusation, not with resentment, but with a delicate mixture of curiosity, fear, and yearning. It was as though he were searching for something that words could never capture, perhaps reassurance, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps the silent acknowledgement of shared history that time had not erased. And yet, each glance was fleeting, a microcosm of restraint and subtle emotion, gone almost as soon as it appeared, leaving only the faintest echo of its intensity in the air. During a particularly complex sequence, Jungkook faltered just slightly, a pause so small it could easily be mistaken for a routine adjustment. But anyone attuned to him, his choreographers, his closest staff, even Tayung, sensed the significance. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of vulnerability hidden beneath layers of training, discipline, and carefully cultivated composure. He corrected himself immediately, spinning into the next movement with flawless execution, yet the brief hesitation lingered in the atmosphere like a whispered secret. Tayung, observing from a short distance, did not intervene. Instead, he allowed the moment to exist, understanding intuitively that Jungkook's emotions could not be guided or rushed. Every subtle motion between them spoke volumes. A shared look across the room, a slight nod, the mere presence in the same space. These were gestures heavy with meaning, charged with histories neither needed to verbalize. In their silence, emotions resonated louder than any words could. As the evening continued, fatigue began to etch itself across the dancers' bodies, but Jungkook's intensity remained. It was not merely the result of discipline or professionalism. It was something deeper, a compulsion to express, to release, to navigate the internal turbulence he carried. Each movement became a bridge between what he felt and what he could not say, between connection and isolation, between the public performance and the private struggle. When the music faded for a brief pause, Jungkook sank onto the floor, breath uneven, eyes glistening with the faintest hint of tears. He did not reach for a towel, did not smile at a joke, did not engage with the chatter that flowed softly around him. Instead, he stayed in that quiet space, his hands resting loosely on his knees, head tilted slightly downward, as if contemplating a question that had no immediate answer. Tayung approached slowly, careful not to disrupt the fragile rhythm of emotion, and simply stood nearby. No words were exchanged, only a shared acknowledgement of presence, of understanding, of emotion held gently in the space between them. The hours passed, and the rehearsal reached its final stages. Jungkook's movements had become a tapestry of contrasts, strength intertwined with fragility, precision intertwined with longing, discipline intertwined with raw emotion. Observers remarked later that it was as if he were dancing with shadows, with memories, with questions he could not articulate. Each gesture was meticulous, yet imbued with a quiet melancholy, a subtle sadness that transformed the choreography into a narrative of human vulnerability. Even after the final notes of music had faded, Jungkook did not immediately leave the studio. He lingered, walking slowly among the mirrors, hands lightly tracing patterns on the glass, eyes distant. The reflection staring back at him was more than a trained idol. It was a young man grappling with the weight of emotions too complex to name, a man caught between joy and sorrow, connection and solitude. Tayung watched quietly, sensing that some moments of reconciliation, some glimpses of understanding, needed no words at all. Outside the studio, fans speculated endlessly. Clips and images from the day circulated online, and discussions erupted across social media platforms. The world saw an immaculate performance, but the perceptive noticed the nuance, the subtle communication, the weight of emotions Jungkook carried in silence. Why does he look so different? What is he feeling when Taeyong is near? Every move seems to tell a story we can't fully understand. The questions multiplied, the curiosity grew, and the hidden sadness embedded in each gesture became the focus of fervent attention. By the time the studio lights dimmed completely and the space fell silent, the day had left its mark. Jungkook's body was exhausted, yet the emotional intensity lingered, imprinted in every muscle, every expression, every glance. Taeyung remained nearby for a while, then quietly left, leaving Jungkook alone in the dimmed studio. It was a moment heavy with unspoken understanding, a reminder that some truths could only be experienced, not articulated. Some reconciliations needed time, and some sorrows could only be carried quietly, hidden in the rhythm of movement and the subtlety of gestures and the quiet aftermath. The studio itself seemed to hold its breath, echoing with the intensity of a day in which dance had become confession. Presence had become connection, and every movement had carried the weight of a human heart navigating its own intricate depths. Jungkook's sadness was not dramatic or performative. It was real, intimate, and undeniable, and though it remained unseen by many, it had left a profound mark on the space, on those who witnessed it, and on the narrative of his connection with Taeyung. The following morning, the studio felt different. The echoes of yesterday's rehearsal lingered like a soft aftertaste, a subtle imprint of emotion woven into the walls, mirrors, and polished floor. Jungkook arrived first, as always, though today there was an almost imperceptible heaviness in his step. The usual energy that radiated from him like sunlight seemed muted, filtered through an undercurrent of quiet reflection. He stretched silently, eyes scanning the studio as if searching for something invisible, some trace of the previous day that might offer clarity or solace. As Taeyung entered, the dynamic shifted instantly. The familiar spark of his presence brought a mixture of relief and tension. Jungkook's gaze flickered toward him, and for a fleeting second, the warmth of connection seemed possible. Then, as if remembering the fragility of yesterday, he withdrew slightly, returning to his own rhythm while still allowing Taeyung to occupy the same space. It was a delicate dance of proximity and distance, one that spoke more of emotional complexity than any choreography ever could. Rehearsal began, but the atmosphere carried an unspoken weight. Jungkook's movements were precise, flawless in technical execution, yet they hummed with subtle melancholy. As the day wore on, the choreography grew more demanding. The music swelled, pushing both dancers to the edge of endurance. Yet in Jungkook's every motion, there was a duality. Strength paired with vulnerability, confidence paired with fragility. It was visible in the way he executed complex sequences with flawless precision, yet occasionally allowed his eyes to wander toward Taeyung, seeking a connection that might provide reassurance or understanding. The dance had become more than performance. It had become a dialogue of emotion, an intimate communication that transcended words. Fans watching behind-the-scenes footage later described the effect as almost hypnotic. "It's like he's speaking without speaking," one wrote. Every movement is loaded with feeling. You can see the